We are live now, just to let the audience to know that we are going to start. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for making time to attend this side event, which is going to focus on the human rights situation in Bahrain. The reality, on the 2nd of May 2013, human rights defender Naji Fateel was arrested and taken from home by police. He was taken from home in his village of Beni Jamra in northwest Bahrain. He was held without formal charges at a location which was not unknown to anybody. Naji Fateel, I know him very well. I met him a few times, and I know him as a courageous human rights defender in Bahrain. He was, and is still, a member of the board of the directors of the Bahrain Youth Society for Human Rights. Since 2007, he has been in prison many times, tortured and targeted and received death threats. He participated in the work of the Human Rights Council, and he got for that a lot of reprisals. And he sentenced to more than 15 years in prison. He's still in prison. Even in prison, he went through many hunger strikes demanding his rights. I have to mention one thing that he did. In 2012, before this last arrest, he's supposed to be released, but he refused. He said, I want to stay in prison because my mentor, my teacher, Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja, is on hunger strike and his life is at risk. So I want to stay in prison. So that is Naji Fateel. And this side event is about Naji Fateel and all the detained human rights defenders in Bahrain. We are calling for his release and also the release of all those detained defenders and prisoners of conscience. Also, we will touch upon the human rights situation in Bahrain. If Asma is available, I will start with Asma. Asma Darwish is working for Bahrain Center for Human Rights, a leading NGO that documents violations in Bahrain. And Asma herself involved heavily in the advocacy work of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. So the floor is yours, Asma. Thank you. It seems that Asma has a problem, a technical problem. She can't hear me. So I move to our next speaker, Nina Mckee, who is
Asma can hear you. Asma can hear you. She just can't. She can't get her off mute. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm working on that.
So work on it. We go to our next speaker, Nina Mckee. She's working for the Americans for human rights and for Americans for democracy and human rights in Bahrain. The ADHRB heavily involved also in advocacy. They were working very hard and still with the various international mechanisms, including the UN mechanism. So, Nina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I think we all have the problem, Khalid. We have to give everybody the possibility to unmute. Asma, are you unmuted now?
Yes, I'm unmuted, finally.
Okay, I managed that. Nina, I'll unmute you as well. Sorry about that.
Okay, should Asma start since that is what was planned?
Sorry, so we go back to Asma. Yes, Asma, please go ahead.
Okay, no problem. I had a hard time connecting, but it's okay. So I'm Asma Darwish, and I'm the advocacy officer at Bahrain Center for Human Rights. I've been closely working on human rights cases and situation in Bahrain since 2011 in February, when the social and political movement kick-started. And I've been monitoring and documenting the situation from the ground until 2015. And then in 2015, I was forced to leave the country, and I've been residing in France since then. The situation from the ground, and I've been observing the situation from the ground since then, and it has not been developing in a good manner. In fact, the prisoners of conscience and the political prisoners rest behind prison bars. Many of them are survivors of torture, and the civil space is quite shut down. Independent media is shut down. The Bahrain has been, in fact, ranked in a very restricted in terms of press and media. Human rights defenders, as Khalid said, cannot practice their work freely. You can go to prison for a tweet or for a like on a post on Facebook you've been posted. I myself was targeted by the government of my country when I was a student back then in 2011. I was dismissed from my last year in university because of retweeting and reposting some posts on Twitter and on Facebook. And I was dismissed from university for that. And since then, the situation has been going on. It never stopped. And we in human rights organizations, as human rights defender, we try to do our best for enhancing the situation of human rights in Bahrain. In fact, I've been always saying that when we criticize the government, it's nothing personal. In fact, we criticize the performance of the government to make the reality on the ground better for everyone. And I think it's consuming for the people, it's consuming for the government. So there has to be a solution for everyone to live in peace, I would say, to have full participation in the social and civil and political life in the country, to release all political prisoners from prison, especially with the situation of the pandemic right now. Already it's being hard to control the pandemic for people who are having normal life in their houses. So I imagine it's even more difficult to control the situation inside prisons. And we've seen, like many countries, they have taken the initiative to release their prisoners, whether they were political or not. They've released thousands of prisoners to take a step in controlling this pandemic. So that's what we've been engaging in as human rights organizations, whether they were local or regional or international. It's to urge the Bahraini government to take a step and release prisoners and initiate a dialogue, in fact, with all parties of the society. And I think it's time to carry on reform and to flip that page of 10 years of oppression, 10 years of restricting freedoms. A lot of people has been affected by that, and the government is included. They have been affected as well, and we don't want that. We don't want that for the government. We don't want that for our people. We just want a country that respects human rights for everyone, and that should start with a serious will changing the reality in the country for everyone. And of course, dedicating this webinar for Naji Fateel. Naji Fateel has been quite active in demanding the rights for the Bahraini citizens, and he's quite known from the ground, and he's been in prison since then. And I think it's time for him to be released, and for all other human rights defenders and political prisoners and political activists. I think it's time. It's been already late enough. 10 years has passed. I think it's time to turn that page, to improve the reality for everyone, and for giving human rights defender the space for continuing their work. I think that's it for now. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Asma, and I agree with you. We are not enemies of governments in our region. We want to work with government to ensure a full respect to the people's rights in Bahrain and elsewhere across the MENA region. That is the aim of civil society organizations. We are only trying to protect people's rights. And when we talk about Bahrain, the government needs to show willingness to reform. And the first step, really the first step, to release all those people who are really in a prison only for their legitimate and peaceful human rights activities. Naji Fateel is just one example. The anniversary of his arrest was this month on the 2nd of May, and now we are celebrating his human rights work, always peaceful. Naji Fateel is the peaceful human rights defenders, and we are united in this call. We just call on the Bahraini government to release all the detained human rights defenders and also all the prisoners of conscience. So that's our call from here. Now we move to our second speaker, Nina Mckee from the Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain, a very active organization in defending the rights of people in Bahrain using the international mechanisms, including the UN system. Nina, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the event. So yeah, I'm Nina. I'm American and Canadian. And as Khalid said, I'm based in Switzerland as an advocacy assistant for ADHRB. In Switzerland, we focus mostly on the UN Human Rights Council and the related mechanisms. So I've been asked to give an overview of who Naji Fateel is and the treatment that he's received at the hands of the Bahraini authorities. So as you've heard, he's a prominent human rights activist. He was a protest organizer, a co-founder and member of the board of directors of the Bahrain Youth Society for Human Rights, and a blogger. He had been active in human rights for a long time, including during the 2011 pro-democracy protests, and had received multiple death threats, as you heard, had been arrested multiple times, including in 2007 and 2012 for his human rights work. Although eventually in 2012, he was released on bail thanks to the work of activist organizations. However, as you also heard, on May 2nd, 2013, he was violently arrested and arbitrarily arrested without a warrant in his own home. When he was arrested, he was then held incommunicado for several days at the Criminal Investigations Directorate, or the CID, which is the branch of the Ministry of Interior. When he wasn't being held in solitary confinement there, he was being subjected to torture, including severe beatings, electric shocks, simulated drownings, verbal insults. He was subjected to sleep deprivation, and he was forced to stand for long periods of time. He also repeatedly received rape threats and was threatened with the arrest of his family, and threatened that private pictures of his wife would be published if he did not comply with the investigating officers. In one testimony he gave, he recounted how he blacked out twice while being hung from the ceiling and was subsequently transferred to a hospital. 4 days after his arrest, on May 6, 2013, he was brought before the Public Prosecution Office to be interrogated. At this point, he was denied his legal right to an attorney. He was handcuffed and blindfolded throughout the interrogations, and eventually he was forced to sign a confession without knowing the contents of the document. This confession was eventually used against him in trial. All of this treatment of him was allegedly for his human rights activism and for his participation in the 22nd session of the Human Rights Council in March 2013. So there were 3 trials that were held for him between May 2013 and January 2016. During these trials, he was sentenced to a total of 25 years and 6 months in prison on the charges of, first, participating in an illegal assembly with the purpose of disrupting public security by using violence. Second, establishing the group, the February 14th Coalition, with the intention of reforming the Constitution. And third, participating in the Zhao prison riots on the 10th of March, 2015. All of the judgments issued against him were upheld, although eventually the third sentence was reduced to 10 years. So in total, 15 years in prison for his human rights activism. To this day, he remains in Zhao prison, and he has continued to receive psychological and physical torture. He's not allowed to see his family. He sustained numerous injuries from the original torture that he experienced, which includes suffering from reduced hearing loss in his left ear and relying on a hearing aid in the other. He suffered from a broken leg and nose, wounds to the back. In 2018, he was supposed to have surgery for a leg injury, but it was canceled by prison authorities. And the food is wholly insufficient for his particular health condition, which is having high cholesterol. Numerous complaints have been filed both by him and on his behalf. Following the Zhao prison riots in 2015, he filed several complaints to the Special Investigations Unit, the Public Prosecutor's Office, the National Institute for Human Rights, the Punishment Enforcement Judge, and the Attorney General, but none of these complaints were followed through on. In addition to this, he and his wife also filed a complaint to the Ombudsman of the Ministry of Interior in 2014. This was not investigated. And in 2013, the president of the Law Society sent a letter to King Hamad expressing deep concerns over his particular condition, his arbitrary arrest and detention. No investigation was conducted into the first letter. And in 2015, a subsequent letter was sent. This one included the events of one of Naji's court hearings, during which the judge reportedly obstructed the defense from interviewing the prosecution witnesses, a policeman silenced a lawyer, and another attorney was thrown out of court. None of this was looked into either. So clearly, within Bahrain, things aren't working. There's a clear perversion of the justice system, and the human rights bodies like the National Institute for Human Rights, which is supposed to be investigating cases like these, are not following through. So as I said, now he remains in prison. He's still subjected to physical and psychological torture. He continues to be placed in solitary confinement, sometimes for up to 6 months at a time. He's gone on several hunger strikes in order to protest his freedom, for his freedom and for better conditions, including access to healthcare, better food, access to his family, ability to practice religious rights. But when he does this, he's often placed in solitary confinement. Obviously, all of these events and all of this treatment constitutes clear violations of international human rights bodies like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention Against Torture, the ICCPR, and all others, as well as Bahrain's own laws against torture and inhuman treatment, because it does have them, but it obviously does not follow them. So all of this shows the very strong culture of impunity that is perpetrated by Bahraini authorities. Naji's torturers remain able to torture other people. They're at the Ministry of Interior, and hundreds, thousands of political prisoners and activists like him continue to be imprisoned, having experienced a lot of similar treatment. So what we need, what Bahrain needs, what the political prisoners, Naji Fateel need, are the leaders of of democratic nations, leaders of European nations, of the US, Canada, to speak out against his imprisonment and the practices of torture that lead to this culture of impunity. This can and should happen both bilaterally and multilaterally. In the EU, the new Global Magnitsky Act allows for sanctions to be put into place. This is a good opportunity to sanction those torturers and to sanction torturers who have been involved in other political prisoners treatment and the torture of anyone in Bahrain. The international community should also call for his unconditional and immediate release and pardon. This should be absolutely unconditional because though maybe you've heard of the alternative sentencing program in Bahrain, it's been widely advertised by the Bahraini authorities and lauded as a success, but in fact, it continues to stifle human rights dissidents. It allows for the continued surveillance and monitoring of people. And these are human rights activists. There's no need to monitor. So all of this should come as part of a bigger effort for the unconditional and immediate release of all political prisoners, because Naji Fateel is certainly an exemplary case, but he is not the only. So ADHRB thanks you all for your support and your time and for any activism that you will do on your own in order to call for the release of these political prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Nina, for talking about torture in Bahrain. Really, it is systematic, the fact that all the defenders, they were tortured. And one example, in addition to Naji Fateel himself, is Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja. He was really severely tortured, that he needed 36 medical operations. He is still in prison serving life sentence, and he needs immediate treatment. But as you see, he's in prison, and we are trying our best to get him out, us and others. Now, without any delay, we go to our third speaker, Gesla Castro from the International Federation for Human Rights, based in Paris, the FIDH. They are heavily involved in Bahrain and worked very hard with us to promote human rights in the country. So, Gisela, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I've tried to put my camera on. I hope it still works, but my connection is a bit unstable, so don't hesitate to tell me if you cannot hear me.
We hear you very well, and your camera is good. So
excellent.
Take your time.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. First of all, I'd like to apologize on behalf of our Director of International Advocacy, Antoine Madelin, who was invited to speak but couldn't make it. But I'm very happy to speak on his behalf. So I'm Gisela. I work at FIDH's Brussels office, so I focus on EU advocacy mainly. I've been following the situation in Bahrain for 6 years now. In this capacity at FIDH, and before I used to work in the European Parliament as well with a British MEP, and we used to follow the situation very closely. So during these 6 years, so I haven't been involved since the beginning, since 2011, but I have a good overview of the advocacy efforts that have been made over the past few years, and so what I've seen is some successes in international advocacy due to the relentless advocacy done and led by human rights defenders from Bahrain, who have come and spoken with international institutions, with European institutions, and sometimes, as you mentioned, facing retaliation as well from the Bahraini authorities. So their courageous advocacy has resulted in some results, and the results is mainly that the international community is aware of the situation in Bahrain. They cannot say that they don't know the widespread nature of the violations, in particular the situation of political prisoners and of human rights defenders. I think this is very clearly, this has gone to the ears of the international community, and so that's a success. However, this awareness, in my sense, has not transformed into concrete change. And I think there are a number of reasons, and the first one is obviously the geographic position and the geopolitical situation of Bahrain. As you all know, Bahrain is not a priority for the European Union. I mean, human rights in Bahrain are not a priority for the European Union and for the US and the UK, simply because they have other priorities in the Gulf. They are looking at Yemen, they're looking at Saudi Arabia, they're looking at Iran, but they're not looking at Bahrain per se, and also human rights in general are not a priority for the international community in the region. We all know that military and economic interests kind of tend to overshadow the human situation in Bahrain, but in other countries of the region as well. And of course, it has been difficult to do any meaningful advocacy or to push it further because of the global shrinking space context that we are placed in, as you mentioned again, the reprisals against human rights defenders that participate in international meetings. So it has been difficult to actually come and forcefully bring some of the messages that we want to bring. I just want to do a little side note on the UK specifically, because as I said, I focus mainly on what's going on in Brussels. And to be honest, when Brexit happened, I was of course heartbroken, but I thought, well, if there's a silver lining here, is maybe that in countries like Bahrain, where the UK has a strategic interest, then maybe this will open up some possibilities for the EU to be more forceful on the human rights situation in those countries. Well, it has not been the case, and I think, well, first of all, we have lost a lot of the MEPs that were the British MEPs who were very active on Bahrain across the political spectrum. So from different political groups, they were always originators of really good initiatives in the European Parliament, be it urgency resolutions, but also letters, statements. I think most of what happened during the previous legislature and in this legislature before Brexit and before the MEPs had to leave their seats, I think that the fact that we lost that is not good, because there's less Bahrain is less on the agenda now at European level, and it was there before because it was put on the agenda by British MEPs. And so I was wrong in thinking that maybe the silver lining of Brexit would be that the EU would be able to take more forceful positions on the human rights situation in Bahrain, because as you probably saw, the European Union signed, or I should say the European External Action Service signed a cooperation arrangement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bahrain. I tried to find out more about what this arrangement is. To be honest, at the beginning, I thought it was a proper agreement. So I thought, well, then it'll have to go through the parliament and to get ratified, and we might be able to have some leverage there. But it's not an agreement; it's an arrangement, and I haven't seen what's in there. But basically, from what I understand from the public communications, is that. It establishes a framework for cooperation, so for regular meetings, basically, between the two institutions, so the EAS and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Where do we go from here? There are a few, I think, ideas that we can explore. As Nina mentioned, the sanctions one, I think is a good one to explore, because. So yes, there's this Magnitsky Act or Magnitsky style legislation that was adopted back in December, But even before that, we also had the possibility to adopt a country, or the European Union had a possibility to adopt a country-specific regime and sanction perpetrators of human rights violations under different framework. But now there's even more options, so that's great. And I know that when we say that, some people will say, well, it's very unlikely because the sanctions have to be adopted at unanimity at the Council. That means 27 member states have to agree on the principle of having sanctions and on the individuals they want to sanction. So it's a very heavy decision to take politically. But even if the objective is a bit unlikely to achieve in the short term, I think it's still useful because, well, one, when we engage in sanctions advocacy, we're forced to document evidence on the perpetrators, and that is always useful because we hope that the perpetrators will be held accountable for the violations they committed in a court of law someday. So it's always useful to gather the evidence. And second of all, advocating for the use of sanctions, I think, helps conveying the gravity of this situation. If we're saying we think perpetrators of human rights violations in Bahrain should be subjected to restricted measures by the European Union, we're saying the situation in Bahrain is so bad that it warrants the use of sanctions. So that helps elevate our other arguments as well, and the other advocacy objectives that we might have, because we're just, it puts things into perspective. We're saying, okay, the situation is extremely serious. We're asking you to adopt sanctions, and so again, they might not in the short term, but I think it's still useful to think about. Other things that could be done is thinking about the trade on arms and dual use technology. A lot of things are happening here in the EU and in member states in particular on that front. So as you know, there's a legal framework that is not really respected by member states. So they are, so there's a lot of civil society groups that are trying to enforce or to make member states enforce these rules. And I think it's a good thing to explore for Bahrain. And two other ideas really quickly. One is the exploring corporate accountability, business and human rights. To be honest, I don't know much about the situation of Bahrain particularly, but I think it's very important to look into the responsibilities of corporations and into these violations, and especially looking at the business ties, the business community, and how it ties with the political sphere, and how we can use this leverage by talking to companies, by talking to investors, and to governments in order to improve the human rights situation. And of course, the last thing is to continue pushing on the multilateral side of things in Geneva, and I'm sure Nina will have more experience and more things to say about that. I know it has been difficult, but the special procedures have done a great job in denouncing the abuses in Bahrain, and I think this is something that could be further explored. So happy to hear your thoughts, and again, thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you so much, Gesla. And this is very important, what you talked about, the advocacy efforts everywhere in Geneva and Brussels and elsewhere. As you know, we don't have any local remedy in our countries. Oppressive governments are doing their best to dismantle the human rights movements. And the only avenue available to us is international advocacy. And for the perpetrators, as you heard from our distinguished speakers, there's really no accountability, and the culture of immunity is spreading in our countries. And as such, we are really trying our best to use the concept of international jurisdiction. We are doing that. So perpetrators, at least they face justice using the international judiciary. for all those people who are in prison, you just think about them not as a single individual. They have life, they have neighbors, they have friends, and then they have, as you know, families. So it is very painful for us to see that our close colleagues are in prison. And on this occasion, as we celebrate the work of our colleague Naji Fateel, I have one close friend who knows Naji very well, worked with him. He used to head the Bahrain Society for Youth Society for Human Rights. It is Mohammed al-Masqati, and I invite our colleague Mohammed al-Masqati to take the floor and to talk about Naji as a person, as a human, and as a defender. Mohammed, the floor is yours. Are you ready to talk? Michael, could you kindly unmute? Yes, yes, Mohammed, we hear you now. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Khalid. And thanks for everyone who is organizing this. I was supposed not to talk on this because Khalid always scared that I get arrested because I'm based in Bahrain. I cannot not say anything about Naji Fateel. I know Naji Fateel from like 15 years. We start working together 2002 when Naji was the head of unemployment committee. Then when we started together Bahrain Youth Society for Human Rights in 2005, Naji joined me and others in the board of director, and I was the head of Bahrain Youth Society for Human Rights for 9 years until I left to join Frontline Defenders. Then Naji became we chose to select Naji and elected Naji as the head of the society after I left, because we think that the most person that really worked hard on human rights in Bahrain and in the youth, and we had really a very active member, it was Naji. Everyone was talking about Naji from human rights side. I want to talk with Naji from different side, the side that maybe not everyone know about. I spend nights with Naji. Sometimes we travel together. We do activity together. We had a lot of time to discuss many things from the human side of Naji. First of all, I want you to know that all his daughters get married during that he is in prison, so he didn't attend any wedding. And I remember when he called me, and he was very happy to tell me that his older daughter will get married. He was so happy because the police decided to take him to the court to attend like, it's not a party, it's just like a day when the wedding happened. And the second time, he was also happy when his daughter gave a birth and Naji became a grandpa. And the worst is that all his important event in his life, he didn't attend one of them. This is one of the most things I think is affecting Naji, because Naji was very close to his family. He was very close to his wife and his kids. And his kids they were really young, and one of them she need special education, and Naji was trying to take her to a special school because she is a special need, so she need specific education. And he was worrying about this. I remember when he called, he kept calling me and say, to be sure that his kids is getting good education. The other things that in 2007, when Naji arrested, the main things is if you want to get released, you need to confess against 3 or 4 people from the society, and I was one of them. But he say, I can't confess against myself. It's fine, but I will not confess against my friends or colleagues because this is unethically, and I will not do it. So he get tortured badly actually, and he decided to receive all this torture rather than to just say words and sign a paper saying that we are part of everything and they can arrest us. So I mean, when we look to person like Naji from the human rights situation, from human rights side, he is amazing. But on this side, there's a really when you look to Naji first time, you say that wow, he's really strong and really. I mean, he will not be crying, but you know, when the pair roundabout attack the first time, it was 2 or 3 a.m. Naji he called me and he started crying because of what he saw in the roundabout, and he was so sad, and he wants to do anything, and he trying to do anything, and he was telling me what we can do, how we can bring medics, how we can bring nurse, how we can bring first aid to just helping people. And I was hearing the shooting in the background, and still he is in the veranda trying to help people to get treated. I don't want to take the whole time. I mean, just one thing to tell you that Naji didn't stop working in human rights, and he keeping calling us from prison, say, look, Muhammad, there is Indian person, he don't have a lawyer. There's someone from Philippines, he don't have a lawyer. So please look to that person, call his embassy, call someone, call his family, because these people, they don't treat it well. So this person is keeping doing his job even when he is in prison. So I really miss Naji as a person. I really miss Naji as human rights defenders, and I think I will missing him until he released. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muhammad, for such a very passionate speech about somebody who is so close to you, who worked with you. And I agree with you. That is Naji. That is the real Naji, who is ready to put all the efforts all the time. Naji and Abdul Hadi, Dr. Abdul Jalil Singez, all of them, they could be released tomorrow if they just say we are going to leave the human rights. But they are really in prison just because they are still human rights defenders. It is Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja who said the human rights will start while we are in prison. It is not the end of it. Prison is not the end of our human rights duties. And he went through many hunger strikes demanding the rights of prisoners. So we know them very well, reliable human rights defenders. And again, we call on the government of Bahrain to start a real reform, to release all those people in Bahrain. They committed no crime. They only called for a prosperous future for every single citizen in Bahrain. I stop here to see if you have any question. Just raise your hand and my colleague Michael will let you speak. We welcome all the questions. Any question, any idea, if you have any objection, this is a free space. You could talk about any issue that we think it's important. So if there is no question, I will go back to speakers, but we give 1 minute to people to think. Raise your hand if you want to talk. If you have any, yes?
You can raise your hands in the reactions on the bottom right, and if we see that, we'll send you a request to unmute, and then you can unmute yourself. For reasons I think most people understand, we haven't allowed people to unmute themselves on as participants.
in our activities in the past on Bahrain, together with our human rights partners, we used to get, hackers who are trying just to disturb the meeting. So we decided to unmute all the participants, and including us and the speakers, just to make the environment safe. But now we are ready to unmute any colleague, any friend who wants to talk. Is there any question? Any hand raised, Mckee?
No, I don't see anything. I don't see anything yet.
So I go back to the speaker, to our three speakers. First, I would like to ask Asma. Asma, you are Bahraini, and you are trying your best to improve human rights situation in Bahrain. So my only question, as we conclude the event, what do you think the future will be for the human rights movement in Bahrain? Are you optimistic? Is there something that we should do? Do we have to change our approach to kind of have some successful outcome? I leave you with this question, Asma.
Thank you, Khalid. Well, I think every approach is appreciated. There is no certain way to defend human rights and advocate for human rights. There are a lot of ways, and everyone is doing his best. Every organization, every group, human rights group, are doing their best in advocating for the case of human rights, not only in Bahrain, but the entire world. So there is no certain way of doing it. There are many, many ways. The struggle has to continue, of course. There should not be any reluctance about this. It should continue, and we know that when the human rights groups, whether they were individuals or organizations, when they are silent, in fact, the government of Bahrain and also other governments are emboldened, and they carry on their human rights violations in a wider range. But then when there is a movement, no matter how it is, no matter what the approach is, the government is somehow sensitive to that approach. And we have seen changes, not quite a lot, not very significant, but we still saw that there could be some kind of results from the advocacy on human rights. And then, as I said, that I think it's time to change the situation. I think it's time for the government to end the situation. The world is suffering enough already. We can see what's happening around the world in other countries, what's happening in Palestine right now, in other countries also. I think Bahrain is too small to be having this kind of dire human rights situation. It's a small country. It could be a perfect country where everyone enjoys their basic human rights and more than that. So I think it's time for the government of Bahrain to decide something positive. And then if it's positive, of course, as I said, we have nothing personal with them, nothing personal at all. We will definitely welcome any positive steps taken in this direction, the direction of respecting human rights.
Thank you so much, Asma. I couldn't agree more with you. A small country with really a lot of well-documented violations. I move now to Nina, and the question is the fact that you are based in US, and you know that unconditional support given by US to oppressive governments in the region, including the Bahraini government, is probably one of the reasons that our colleagues, including Naji, is still in prison. So how we could change the situation, Nina? Do you suggest something, some work that we could do to change that? Thank you.
I don't know that I can suggest anything that hasn't been tried or isn't still being done, but I think continuing to advocate for change in the US, on the US government, absolutely. We've seen a little bit of a shift anyway in the last couple months with the incoming Biden administration.
That is what I meant, like the President Biden himself, he welcomed the release of Jain al-Hadlul himself. So this is a bit of change in the policy of the new administration. So I mean, do we not have a good chance now to pick up this opportunity to really make a shift in the policies of the US administration? Mm-hmm. That's what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I think now is a really important time to continue the advocacy of the Biden administration, to push them. You know, someone said to me recently that you have to push your foes hard, but your allies harder. So your friends, you know, the Biden administration they should be amenable to pushing forward these human rights policies, particularly given the stated human rights foreign policy that Anthony Blinken said when he was giving his first speech. And absolutely, I think now is the time, and also using any domestic tools to get to the foreign policy. So putting pressure on Congress persons, they're the ones who are able also to influence the executive branch.
Thank you so much, Nina. And I move to Gesla and the EU. And the EU, Gesla, you are aware of the EU guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders. And I could say that they are not implemented in Bahrain and probably in other countries. So is there anything that we could do to ask EU to put human rights before profits, at least for the surveillance equipment that is exported from EU to oppressive governments such as Saudi Arabia and Bahrain? Could we stop that? What do you think, Gisela, from your work and from your meetings? Is there any hope that we could do something about that?
Well, there's always hope, but as I said, it's been difficult to engage with the EU because of the reasons I laid down, because of the geopolitical situation, because of the also simply the. Even though the UK is outside of the EU, they continue to cooperate on many aspects, and also, of course, they continue to cooperate with the US. So I guess my answer would be very similar to Nina's. So we can continue to advocate. The good thing is, as you said, in the EU we have instruments like the guidelines that are binding. Presumably, and that the EU has to implement. So there's to keep pushing on that. And but the what I said in my previous intervention, I think is what's important. Meaning, we have tried to go about it simply. I would say to go and talk to member states and to talk to the EAS, and to say the EAS that implements obviously what the member states want. So they don't. I mean, I don't want to blame them as an administration too much, because I know that it's difficult when the member states are reluctant to take. Strong positions, but we have tried to go and talk to them and say and convey the gravity of the situation and show how as well Bahrain, I think, illustrates a lot of things that are wrong with the EU's foreign policy, in the sense that they have partners in the field of security, for example, in the field of counterterrorism, that are not only countries that have appalling human rights records, but that deliberately use counter-terrorist policies and laws to go against human rights defenders and against civil society and to commit human rights violations. So that's just not acceptable. But anyway, we have tried to convey these messages and they haven't been picked up. It has, as I said, it hasn't resulted in any concrete change in terms of the engagement with the country. And so this is why I suggest exploring other avenues, and that is trying to put European member states in front of their responsibilities and hold them accountable for a number of things, including the trade in dual-use goods, including corporate accountability, all of these things. And again, I think sanctions is there's a momentum right now with sanctions, as I said, with the the adoption of the new regime, which opens up new possibilities. But what it does more than anything is put sanctions kind of on the forefront, and everyone is considering. I work on many different countries, and I know that civil society around the world is trying to put to put together sanction submissions, and I think it's exciting because it's as I said, it's an option that existed before, but that right now is very much on everyone's mind. So that's great, and I think we should continue pushing on that.
Thank you, Gesla. We will continue. And as you said, there is always hope. And we have this question in the chat box. What do you think is the most useful thing we can do as advocacy assistants in order to release Naji and other detained human rights defenders? Communicate with the embassies of Bahrain everywhere. Communicate with your politicians, with your government. Be involved in one of our campaigns, whether FIDH, ADHRB, BCHR, or GCHR. We welcome your involvement. We support you and you support us. And that is the way to go forward. Always when there is a public activities, always government will feel the pressure and they will be forced to release those people who are in prison. Now, without any delay, if there is any question,
there's a question. There's a question. Go ahead, Anthony. I think I've given you the, yeah, go ahead.
Hello, thank you to all the speakers. I have a question to Ms. Castro. I'm wondering, what role do you envision businesses in playing in the Bahrain human rights advocacy?
Okay. So.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't get it, sorry.
I was wondering, what role do you envision with regard to corporate accountability? What role can businesses play in advocating for human rights on the ground in Bahrain?
Sure.
Business and human rights, what kind of impact will have on the situation of human rights in Bahrain? That is the question, please, Gisela.
Sure. Thank you. So as I said, I'm not an expert in this field in general, and even less in Bahrain. But I think there's a lot of interesting things happening with, especially at the OSCE level. So I think engaging with the national contact point for Bahrain is a good thing, is a good option, as well as documenting I think we have to start there, documenting the involvement of businesses in human rights violations. And then there are a myriad of initiatives that are being taken in terms of, for instance, human rights due diligence here at the European level. There's I'm sure you know, a legislation that is being discussed for a mandatory human rights due diligence for European businesses. As well as you know, again, a myriad of initiatives led by civil society of engaging with some of the companies, of engaging with investors, and I think it can't. So there's two things. There's one, the fact that we can tackle the human rights violations that are directly supported or enabled by the corporations. But also there's the fact that if the business community becomes aware or more aware of the human rights abuses that are taking place in the country, and especially if it's somewhat tied to the business world, they become also advocates for their own interests. But it's still useful to use, and so as I said, I haven't really worked on Bahrain for this, but for instance, when you look at countries like China or other countries in which there are a lot of human rights violations that are documented in the supply chain of European companies, what happens is European companies go and talk to their own governments and ask them to take a more firm stance when it comes to human rights in that country. So that's something that is worth exploring.
Thank you, Gesla. And still, we could question the big international companies to apply the same human rights standards that they are implementing in their home countries. It is not acceptable for them to come to our countries to work with oppressive governments and to ignore civil society organizations. So I would like to thank you all for making time to attend this event. I have to thank our distinguished speakers, Asma Darwish, Gesla Castro, Nina Mckee, and Mohammed al-Masqati. Thank you, Mohammed, for participating from Bahrain. And again, I would like to thank you, and I hope that we will meet again in a similar activity on Bahrain or on some other countries. Thank you so much. I wish you a very good day. Thank you.